Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Ian Carter, Deputy Chairman of the States of Alderney Policy and Finance Committee, and we're going to discuss the first draft of the Island Strategic Plan. Welcome, Ian, and congratulations on a monumental feat.
I don't know about that, Tony, but certainly a lot of other people have contributed to this. So
yes, I realise that. But nevertheless, you've got to try and make it all fit.
Correct, yes,
yeah.
Correct. Absolutely.
Put the jigsaw together. First question is, how many plans have there been in the last 30 years? Because I am aware of some that seem to have gone a little bit astray.
Well, I think one of the things we started off with was simply looking back into the state archives at those plans. And I think I went back to this century, so just from the 2000s onwards. I think there were 5 I could find, some of which would appear to have been more engaged with than others, and but unfortunately each of them seemed to die at some point and just weren't carried through, which is a great shame because there's an incredible amount of work put in. And so there's one, I think, back in 2004 where the states actually engaged an outside company to come in to help it, and that really had legs, but for whatever reason it seemed to lose momentum.
So we're agreed that if we're going to have this, we've got to make sure the politicians and the civil servants keep up the momentum.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I suggested, and certainly the other members of the group, the planning group were keen on, is that we do come back to the states in terms of a report at least every 6 months to say, well, where have we got to? And if we have failed, that we've not achieved something, actually say that, you fess up that you've not managed to get this done, and you learn from it as to why, and you do reiterate, we start again, or you change tack.
Okay, so you used SurveyMonkey to get public participation. As you know, I tend to look at that more as a sort of way of gauging people's liking for baked beans and things like that, rather than giving you a true situation, because all it does is rank questions in terms of what, excellence through to bad or something like that. About the only way you can do it, presumably.
Well, no, we didn't actually do it that way. In fact, using SurveyMonkey, we were asking for people's opinions on different statements, but not asking to rank them. And I think that was one of the key things that we wanted. We didn't want people to say, well, what did you think was the absolute most important? We wanted to get groups of areas. It's not easy. It's the way it. Well, if I can be absolutely frank with you, it's cheap. The states has a license. We can use that. There's certainly been pushback before about putting out paper copies of things to households, so we didn't want to do that. We were at that time, COVID last March, April, was not in an ideal position for us to hold open meetings. So it was a quick-ish way to get things moving. It's not the ideal way. And one of the things that I think is a positive is that people still come up to you in the street and say, well, what are you doing? Have you thought about this? So it isn't just simply using, a bit of available software, but there is much more in the way of interaction, as I say, on the street. But equally, I think the most important feedback we got was the written comments, because, as you say, just simply a group of people who decide, yes, they want to respond to a survey and rank things. Maybe they're a self-selecting group, but if they start to write things, then you've got a little bit more to go on. In fact, that was what we were really pleased with in terms of the volume of written responses, and it took us a little longer to really try to get to the bottom of where people wanted things to go through those written responses.
You've listed a number of drivers for the plan, and so we're going to go down those in order. First of all, the civil service. How many staff actually hold a CILCA, which is the equivalent of a local government clerical examination qualification?
I asked Kath Jones, the chief executive, that question. She couldn't give me an answer. I don't know is the answer to that. I mean, my previous experience in sort of local government or with local government in the UK is that it's certainly a useful qualification, but not an essential one. I don't know. I'm sorry, Tony.
No,
That's one.
well, that's fair enough. But you know, as an educationalist, you would agree that professional qualifications are very important.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I mean, I don't know what the circumstances are, for example, of the CEO, but I would say in this day and age, a CEO needs an MBA. Somebody heading up the Treasury needs an accountancy qualification. And, you know, people lower down still need qualifications. And indeed, if they were in financial services, they wouldn't be able to talk to their clients unless they'd passed the necessary trustee or insurance exams or anything like that.
I certainly agree with you there. And I think one of the things that Kath wants to do is to embed and create a much more, well, professionalized and a civil service that wants to learn.
Yeah.
And that I think is something that we, obviously the states members, very much want to back her on that, because as you say, if you've got people who are committed, they've had to go outside perhaps their comfort zone in terms of having to do some work that helps them be a little bit more perhaps circumspect in making decisions, or be more considerate in the way in which they seek data out. You know, I think that's only for the good. And yeah, it's something that I certainly would support moving forward. That's what we should be aiming for. Whether everybody needs one and what level, I don't know. If again I put my education hat on, the one person in a school, believe it or not, who doesn't have to have a teaching qualification is the head teacher. That's a bizarre thing.
But head teachers these days tend to be more administrators than teachers, don't they?
Unfortunately, yes. That's the case. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I got into local government nearly 60 years ago, and one of the conditions of employment was to take the local government clerical exam and pass it, of course. So that taught me about the separation of powers.
Yeah.
And coming on to the government structure, which is another of the drivers, we're no nearer to that than we have been over the years. And, you know, Andrew MacDonald in his report in 2016 clearly cited that this was a rather important function of government to have the executive and the legislature split.
Yeah, and that's what the sort of governance group that started its meetings at the beginning of the year, beginning of last year rather, are struggling, well, not struggling with, they are coming up with a suggestion. I don't want to prejudge what those suggestions are, because that would be wrong, but it's something I suppose coming into the States new, it's something that I could sort of see it is a real issue actually for States members becoming. It's very easy to think, oh, well, I could do that to help the capacity, because the civil service capacity is not great. I mean, there's a limited number of people, and the actual amount of time that is available is limited, and it's very easy, I think, for those sort of grey areas to just say, oh, I'll do that for you, because you know you do have you bring, each of us brings skills to the party. That understanding between executive and governance, that has to be perhaps rather more emphasised, and a system that maybe or should be better, more focused than it is.
But Guernsey have committee government, but they've got an executive in the form of PNR, haven't they?
PNR, yeah. And
I think what's the big deal here?
Well, I'd say I will wait. We'll wait for the governance group to report.
See what they have to say.
See what they come up with.
Transport strategy. Obviously, we're getting to a situation where that can is continuing to be kicked down the runway. They should have started widening it, and that still hasn't happened. Where do you see that at the moment? I mean, it's very important, isn't it? It's one of the primary drivers of your plan.
I just said it is the primary driver. As I said at the beginning, I didn't really want to make a hierarchy out of these areas, but if we don't get the transport right, we're not going to have the people come to the island and the vibrancy that we want. It is, as you say, one of these things where it would appear, so totally really dependent on Guernsey and the way in which they are moving their particular thinking forward. And it would appear the thinking, if you like, has certainly changed quite dramatically in the last 4 years. And so where we are now is P&R in Guernsey committed to a fund to fund the runway rehabilitation, and now yet another, I suppose, check for them as to what would happen and the risks involved if they both extend and widen the runway as well. And I think we have the issue of, obviously, is one of a state airline in the middle of this, and the way in which all these three things, Alderney, Guernsey States and Aurigny, the interactions there, they are not straightforward.
No. And it's always difficult, isn't it, when you get a state-owned airline involved in something like this? Because if Aurigny was a commercial airline, they wouldn't be knocking on Guernsey's door and saying, "Hey, extend the runway."
I don't think they would. If I was the commercial director of that airline, I certainly wouldn't. No.
But there we are.
But we have to obviously be very cognizant and really understand that relationship to ensure that those lifeline routes are retained, and that obviously from our perspective that we either both maintain or hopefully enhance the number of seats that are available for people from the island and to the island.
This is one of these things we're just going to watch it. I have to say that I'm pretty pessimistic about it actually coming to pass in my lifetime. I'm giving myself 10 years.
Yeah, I go through phases. I think again, it's, if you like, being on the inside of it now, seeing the decision making from the inside. I now have a much greater appreciation of perhaps some of the issues that I certainly didn't before, and that does help, I think, understand perhaps why we're where we are. And as I pushed all the way through, is communication is the key to all these things, and maybe the amount of information that we get out is not perhaps as timely as it can be sometimes. I don't see it as anything being hidden, but it's just the timeliness of getting communication to the community that's key.
If we extended the runway, though, it's going to cost quite a bit, isn't it? Because you've got to upgrade the airport. You know, people have been talking about 40 to 50 million pounds, and you know, we're in a state as a bailiwick where there isn't really any surplus money around. So, you know, you just have to wonder where it's coming from. Let's go on to increasing population, the over 50s. Should people coming to the island be prepared to pay for their own healthcare for the first 5 years? This seems to have taken a bit of additional momentum recently as a concept.
I think it has, but from the Guernsey perspective, from the health committee in Guernsey, that they don't see it as just an ordinary issue. They see that as a bailiwick.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, that it is. I mean, an interesting bit of data that they've come up with is that people returning to bailiwick who were born here, they've come back, they've now retired, but then they're also, and this is the difficulty, they then are bringing their parents with them. And if the parents were not, if you like, from the bailiwick, and that's where certainly the chair of or the president of the health committee comes up with some quite interesting data about the costs, if you like, of those who haven't paid into the bailiwick system. And I think that's where the momentum, as you say, has come from. Should there be some form of compulsory health insurance for people who arrive at a certain age? I'm quite uncomfortable with that, in terms of people they come to contribute in whatever way. But I can see that it does seem a little unfair that you maybe have been in the UK for 40 years, you've paid into the UK, you come here, you've paid nothing, and then you go back to the UK for a heart operation. And it's actually the bailiwick that's paying for that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Something to be thought about. Now, what about economic development? What have you got as subheadings there?
Well, I think the key things there are very, very focused on the Economic Development Fund, which we get funding through the Alderney Gambling Commission to focus on those areas that we feel, whether they be probably, again, internet driven skills-based activities. And what we know there is we have to work with the Chamber of Commerce. And in each of this, though it's this plan is the word strategic has been thrown in, it is a high-level plan, and the actual sort of real actions have yet to be fully thought through with each area. And that has to come, and it can only come in consultation with those people who can actually make things happen. So Chamber of Commerce, key partners there. Whether or not we're looking at the way in which the sort of home worker approach, or the digital workers who can work anywhere in the world, and how we promote that's something else that we obviously would want to look at. But I think it's the key thing is working with the Chamber of Commerce to make sure that we're not sort of going up a pathway that has been gone, if you like, researched before, and that we're wasting our time. I think I see that with most of these areas.
Yeah,
it's not the states doing it; they're enablers. We want to try and ensure that then people do things. And like with any plan, it's you're doing it with people. You can't do things to people.
So coming on from that, Ian, we've got the question of housing, affordable housing, childcare, social care, and social services. The housing side's always a problem, because it might be affordable for the first time buyer, but when she comes to sell it on, it just goes back into the general market. So it's only a benefit for the first time buyer, isn't it?
I think that the housing, there's a housing group's been formed, and the sort of research looking at that they've done so far has come up with some quite interesting concepts or ideas that sometimes perhaps maybe the younger person buying a house or wanting to buy a house here doesn't go through the same sort of set of steps perhaps as they might do in the UK. They're actually looking for their family house to start with. Whether or not that is a problem, I'm not sure. It's something that we've yet to bottom out. And likewise, in terms of families or young people entering the market, there are issues with the banks and lending, particularly if they want to go into a leasehold property. That would appear to be practically impossible. Although we have had some quite interesting discussions with one or two of the smaller, I suppose, niche banks in Guernsey. But there is, I think it's a far more nuanced problem than perhaps it might appear to be on the surface. I'm aware of the old C permit system, and that again it worked when it was taken for what it was meant to and designed for, but then was somewhat
bit of abuse.
Abused, yeah. And I believe at one point that the states didn't sort of do its sort of buying back of properties at some point in the past, that was part of the sort of ability to keep properties churning or moving. But it's an area that I don't think, certainly today, we've got an answer for, because you've got to look at different segments of the population, looking at older people wanting to maybe downsize, younger people coming in, families, and obviously people coming to the island with all those different sizes of family, whether it be a single person for a short period. We've not got, I don't think, the data that we really need to make good decisions. But the land use plan revision because of complete sort of I suppose we're revisiting it again every 5 years, is coming up over this coming year, and that I think will be a good opportunity to be able to get at some real expertise through the people who will be appointed, and that way perhaps we can get a little bit more cogent, sensible information that enables us to put a policy in place that does fulfill what we want. The last land use plan has a policy in there, and it'll be interesting to see when you look at the measurements, the metrics, did it work? And if not, well, why didn't it work?
Because the one thing that did really work well in the 70s over here was the Blanc scheme.
Yep.
In terms of self-build, the states haven't got any money. They've got assets in the form of the land. They granted leases. The theory was that the states would buy the properties back, but of course didn't have any money to buy them. But there's a lot of land down there, you know, between Banquarge 1 and Newtown Road that could be exploited for that.
I think it's one of those areas and a scheme, if you like, that adapted for the sort of 2020s that could be taken forward.
Yeah,
I think it's very much, if something worked at the time, I think at that time people would probably aim to build the biggest house they could on that piece of land. So it probably was going to be a family house, and they would hope maybe that was a family house for life. But obviously we know that's not what necessarily happened. And as you say, states didn't then necessarily buy them back, as was the intent. So I think whatever scheme may be developed, we should look very carefully back at those things that worked before reinventing something that maybe, you know, didn't work, or learn from it, which is key.
Yeah, sure. Is anything happening about childcare?
Childcare that's a real it's a challenge for all, I think, in terms of the naught to 3 particularly. If you've got 0 to 4 and 0 to 3, and then you get school and nurseries, you've got the ability to have some for 15 hours of care paid for, and we don't have in that sort of I suppose 6 weeks to that first year of nursery, there isn't the obvious care that could be available. Wraparound care is the aim, and certainly I think I had a group of about this must be about 7 or 8 mothers came to sort of see me to say, well, we want to work, we can't work because there is no provision. And I sort of look at the systems in the UK, or with my family, we lived in Finland for a while, and there you had complete wraparound care from 6 weeks onwards, and it was from 8 in the morning till 8 at night if you wanted it.
Yeah.
But you did have a very high tax system there. But it's something that we've, again, is being looked at, is being reviewed. How you use the private sector, they need to obviously be involved here, and putting in place, I suppose, encouragement for startups for nursery provision in that very young age group is something that can be looked at. It's not something that I think you can direct, and it's a little bit tricky to sort of say, well, the states must provide. But what we do need to make sure is that we've got facilities in place, or that we can ensure that if someone wants to put them in place, we can support it. We also have the hand, if you like, of Guernsey in the background there, in terms of making sure that the standards required for any facility, you know, that they are properly put in place. There's a great difference, I think, now. Early years childcare, it's not just babysitting. I mean, it is an educational process, early years education. So it's not as perhaps it has been in the past.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. That, of course, the economics always come into it. If the parent is having to pay, you know, X pounds a week in childcare and only making X plus 10 or something like that, it suddenly becomes, is it worthwhile getting involved from a parental point of view?
And that's where, again, getting some good data back from parents that has been useful. We found, you know, we exactly those arguments have been put forward, but we're then, as I say, in that position of I suppose a bit of a meat in the sandwich there, in that we've got parents, we've got the tax man, and then how do we provide something that a provider will still make some money out of, but equally will it be able to provide the care that's needed at that required standard? It's not, as with all these things, not straightforward, but it is something that we continue to strive to try and find a solution for.
My grandson, who's age 3, lives in Spain, started, well, he's 4 now, but he started a state school at 3. And possibly that sort of thing could happen here. On a better basis than, you know, normal nursery care. I don't know.
Well, certainly got, you know, nursery provision at the school at the moment.
Yeah. What sort of age do they take them?
They can take them up to from 4.
Yeah.
Either 3 years. But it is that it is actually that preceding 2 years that's a real problem. It would appear at the moment. And will continue to be as it would appear birth rates is relatively for Alderney quite high.
Yeah.
It would, I mean, this is obviously a personal view, but if you put in place that type of sort of 8 till 6 wraparound care at a reasonable cost, and that might require some form of subsidy, then that would be a good attractant to the island, in that to some extent in the UK, that is an expected given in most areas of the country, that is accessible. There's often pressure on quality nurseries, but there is accessibility.
Because it is, yeah, sorry, I was going to say, because it is basically part of the economic development, isn't it?
It is,
yeah.
Because if you've got family-friendly facility, community facilities, that will make any potential move to the island easier or more attractive to individuals, and that's where you then hope that they'll come here and not go to another place, whether it be Guernsey or wherever. And in the same way, the indoor sports facilities, the swimming pool, sports hall, those are the sorts of things that in the UK would be a given. And if you want to attract people, though it's an island of 2,000, those are things that people would expect. But trying to then explain, well, would you expect a village in the UK to just have all those facilities? Then that's the balance we're in, isn't it?
This is always the problem, isn't it? It's scale. It's scale. Can't get away from it. COVID-19 recovery issues. What were you thinking about there?
Well, I think one of the things that I think COVID has done for the island is it's obviously made thinking about risk much a higher profile within the civil service, and the way in which we deal with risk. So I think there's a much more thoughtful and resilient approach, if you like, to any future, whether it be COVID or any form of crisis of this nature, or long-term crisis. To say recovery from COVID is a difficult. I don't think you're recovering necessarily from COVID, because it's all the outcomes from the disease, rather than, and arguably you could say, will we ever recover from it? We'll just live with it in a different way. So I don't think, I would say the island has greater resilience because it's now more thoughtful about a range of areas, about is there cover in these different areas if X stops or Y stops, and what do we now do? So I think from that perspective, things are improved. But I don't think to say specifically because of COVID, these are the things that are now in place that are better. I mean, obviously, in terms of disease control, welcoming teams, and I mean the arguably the way in which people obviously have worked very closely together. There's that sort of camaraderie and the commitment to each other, that's been re-emphasized. But I don't think I'd like to see COVID as being that's the way to do it. That's the other ways we could do that.
No, I think I was thinking more on the basis that COVID equaled the all-time low, if you drew a line, and therefore the revive and thrive that Guernsey were using is really sort of building up and trying to build the economy back up, following the disasters that we've been through over the last couple of years.
Well, I think one of the things we also tried to do with the plan was to see, well, what areas in that revive and thrive, or their government work plan as it's now evolved into, would we be wanting to be, I suppose, piggybacking off. And so from that perspective, whether it be the sort of relocate Guernsey, how we use relocate Alderney to use some of their expertise. So there is that side of it, where I think what it has caused or led to is the real, I suppose, focus that we're at the moment not necessarily using all the capacity we could from Guernsey that we might be able to tap into. And so I think that from that perspective, that is an outcome from COVID, that the closer working relationships at officer level is certainly higher. I think the politicians, it would appear, certainly we have a very positive relationship, as far as I can see, with the deputies in Guernsey. And the number of visits that have occurred both from deputies from Guernsey and ourselves going there, I think has been very positive, and that is helpful. And obviously the whole period of staycations re-emphasised the sort of whole bailiwick concept. So I think from that perspective, COVID has caused a better understanding between both islands.
Talking about transferred services synergy, I think some people, myself included, tend to feel that we should be using perhaps Guernsey facilities more than we do. If, for example, you take planning, which is very contentious at the best of times, as you well know, would it not be better to farm that out to Guernsey to actually carry out the planning process based on the land use plan, rather than have it done locally?
I think there is a tricky one there in terms of having someone actually in the office here who can answer questions at the beginning of any process, I think is useful. Okay, now arguably you could say, well, we could be talking via Zoom or Teams, we could have those conversations. So I think that's perhaps argument has become less strong, and you do, by very dint of, as you say, living here, you are part of the you're part of that process. So you by having someone off island, that helps objectivity. I think there's certainly a lot to be said for having some form of off-island appeals system.
Yes, definitely.
That Guernsey could be used in that way. Although if we look at the Guernsey press today, the Guernsey planners and their deputies put forward a cogent argument as to why something shouldn't go ahead, and that their appeal system threw that out. But I think the process of planning, in particular the land use plan, the two islands have quite different levels of land use plan. Ours are arguably maybe a little bit more professionally done, dare I say it, but is certainly a higher input into it. I'm not convinced that it would necessarily be wholly positive, but I'm less certain now that it has to stay in Alderney.
Okay. Yeah. Of course, there are some people that argue that perhaps we should just become a parish.
There are, and I don't think I have sufficient knowledge to say yay or nay on that. And
that sounded a bit like a politician's answer, Ian, but I don't blame you for that. That's a curveball.
I can just see so many positives and negatives.
Now, another of your drivers is the question of energy policy.
Yeah.
And of course, the thing is that we've recently got to a situation where the states have taken over a brand new power grid. But having said that, is that going to be adequate? Probably not if we go all electric on everything.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, we've got taking any form of power grid, whether it be power grid for all the islands together. That's again something else that appears to be on the table at the moment. A Pan-Channel Islands power grid, but our own on-island grid, whether it, as you say, is as robust as it can be, or is sufficiently robust for increased electrical use. I think obviously James Lancaster, I know you've interviewed on your program before. He's the man who would know. And I would guess that as an organisation, their forward planning, will be part of an energy policy is looking at precisely that. Yes, it's not much good saying, well, we want to go to all electric, but we still got diesel generators in terms of trying to reduce carbon footprint, or we've got all electric, but we can't get it to where it's needed in the quantities that it is actually required. So I can remember simply having to ask them, could I put an electric cooker in where I am? Would I have sufficient power? Just to check. And as you say, that's a key point on an even domestic level.
Coming on to digital connectivity, Guernsey struck a deal with Shaw, I believe. But of course, we've got no money to strike a deal with Shaw, have we?
We've certainly got we've had some discussions coming up with Shaw as to whether money is available, that's something obviously in terms of the budgeting process, one can make, make decisions. And again, part of the background of this plan was to try to help both budgeting, aligning the civil service, aligning what we want to do, so that we're not going to be, if we do decide, that's something we want to do, we will direct money towards it. But that again would be a discussion for the Finance Committee, PNF, as to how they would take that forward. But discussions with Shaw certainly are on the horizon.
And once again, we're agreed that this is a key to the whole thing, isn't it? Digital connectivity. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And how that connectivity, whether it be 5G or whichever G we might get to, that's something that we want to try and stay ahead of the game, and try to think about future proofing rather than actual catch up.
We have to hope that Dorniers are not affected by 5G, Ian.
Well, who knows?
Big mess in the States at the moment.
Gosh, yes, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although I saw a report today from the people who check all of our phone masts that all of our phone masts are compliant. We're not above the world. If you're up at Fort Albert or you're by the water tower, all our masts are absolutely compliant. They're not affecting anybody.
There are some issues that environmentalists will want to talk about. First of all, is this question of raw sewage disposal. We really shouldn't be doing that in the 21st century, should we?
Absolutely agreed, and that's one of the priorities that GSC have for this year, to get to a stage where that just isn't happening. As you say, it's a pretty, it is obviously very disappointing that the states, we signed up to the Blue Islands Charter, I think in 2018, and as you say, we don't appear to be living what was signed, and that's something that I certainly see as one of the real focuses for this coming year, to get this sorted out. It just is, as you say, isn't good enough.
How do you see the staff pension deficit in terms of being a liability?
Well, it is, as you say, a liability. I mean, the trustees, they have responsibility for it. And then obviously the states of Alderney in the end have ultimate responsibility.
Well, the taxpayers actually got ultimate responsibility, because they obviously have to pay when it goes pay as you go.
If it were to go pear-shaped. So I think it's something, it is on it's on the balance sheet if we were to have one. And that balance sheet is something that the states is very, very aware of, and have certainly, both from the point of view of monitoring what's going on and the way in which that reporting is occurring, one would hope that whether it disappears as a deficit, I would not be able to ever guarantee, but whether it reduces or the rate
gets controlled.
It's control that is the key. At least it should plateau. But it is a concern.
Surge funding. How does that work as a concept, and where does the money come from?
Well, again, whether it comes back to, we look at the way in which money for infrastructure comes via the AGCC and the amount of money that has been made available but has not actually been spent. We don't seem to be very good at actually spending the money that is available. If I look, and maybe in just simply prioritizing, I was quite surprised that there wasn't like a priority list of these are the projects and this is how they will work out over the next 10, 20 years. That wasn't really in place. So I think there is some available money that has a place it could go. But obviously, in each case, you've got to have your proper business plan put forward and the capacity to take it forward. And this comes back again to trying to make sure you've got the right people in the right place, and you using Guernsey project managers or planners and using them in terms of a service level agreements, not saying, oh, let's do it all ourselves, because in the end, I don't think there's the capacity. I think sometimes there's an expectation that the state's members, you get on and do all this. Well, we don't necessarily have those skills. You can and again, I would hope that people would understand that you don't want to have amateurs playing at things that lead to potential financial loss. So that you do have to have the professionals in place, and professionals do cost money.
Yeah. Finally, how far should the government go to control our futures? Are you a light touch man or a heavy touch man?
I've as light a touch as possible. I think government should be there to enable people to live their lives. They should be there as the I suppose there for last resort to support people. But that we should be able to live our lives in the way we want to, as long as we don't frighten the horses. I mean, I think that's the key thing. But a light touch person, I think would be fair to say.
So looking at the plan, got a rough idea of what's going to happen over the next few months?
Energy policy will come out. That's one thing that we're certainly very clear on. And also the governance ideas, proposals, they will come through to PNF, and that will be something that I'm sure will create interest. Right.
Ian, it's been a great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for sparing me some of your time, and I wish you well with it.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you. Cheerio.
Cheers.